All right. Good morning and welcome everyone to a podcast by Injeeli Media. Today we're going to discuss a topic where we're talking about the shift of traditional news media to digital platforms. And so we are all very familiar with a lot of these social media apps such as Facebook and Instagram, and our own usage of these apps has contributed to how more news is fed to us through digital platforms such as these apps and not from traditional sources such as TV or radio. And along with Faryal, Waiz, we're going to be discussing why this is happening and what the trends are currently and also for the future, in how more and more people will be abandoning traditional news media and getting their news information from digital applications. So, to start off, there is research that shows around 62% of adults get their news from social media now, as opposed to traditional sources such as TV. And there has also been a decline in TV viewership of about 50%. So as TV viewership is declining, the usage of social media apps is increasing, and more people are getting their news information from social media apps. And the first question I'm going to ask for y'all is, in your own experience, how has your usage of TV been decreasing, if it has been, first of all? And then on the other side, how has your usage of social media apps contributed to how you're getting your news information?
Firstly, thank you very much for having me today, Byron. Now, as you've said, the shift in news consumption patterns is evident in the manner which users encounter breaking news stories. Often, stories are discovered on news media feeds, prompting the users to explore further details on news websites as well as social media platforms. Now, myself, I do actually tend to get a lot of my news from platforms such as social platforms such as Facebook or Instagram. I've sort of found out that it's a lot easier to sort of open up your device, your phone, your tablet, or your laptop and just scroll through the news like that. So, yes, I do actually use Facebook and other social media platforms to get news. Now, I'm not too sure how that has shifted because I used to watch news channels and I was a big fan of traditional news. However, now I have also shifted to social media platforms. And to be very honest, I'm not sure why that is happening. But I guess it is a lot quicker to get information when you're just on the go on your phone or your tablet. So yeah.
Okay. So do you still get news information from the previous sources that you were talking about, like television and all of that? So do you still keep those as secondary sources? And is social media your primary source now, or do you consider them kind of 50-50?
I would have to say that the primary source is social media.
Okay.
Um, because it's like when you're at work or when you're outside and maybe sometimes just don't get the time to sit down and watch it on the television, so it's a lot easier to have your mobile. It's like you can read the news on the go. But I'm not too sure if that is a healthy way of looking at news,
Hmm.
because that sort of makes it seem like that the traditional print media is losing its charm because everybody
Mhm.
has social media, including myself. So I would like to hear your thoughts on what you think as well. Do you tend to use more of social media platforms for your news, or are you more into the traditional um, news channels?
So I think personally, previously, my dad used to watch a lot of news channels, for example, and just growing up, I used to, be sitting down with him and watching these news channels as well. and we would also discuss the information as we were watching together. But over the years, as you have these digital sources and people no longer need to kind of sit in front of a TV to watch a channel for news, right?
Yeah,
It's much easier to just personally consume news as opposed to consuming it, I guess, in a setting where you might be interacting with other people or watching it with other people at the same time. I think that's definitely one of the factors.
sure.
Everyone has their own smartphone or a computer or a laptop, and it's much more of an individualized experience now, right? So that's
Mhm.
just one point. And then I guess secondly, because like you were mentioning, it's so much easier to just be scrolling Facebook and you see some breaking news as opposed to, okay, it's the end of the day. I'm going to sit in front of a TV now and I'm going to watch the 8 o'clock news or whatever it is, right? Uh, so I think it's much more accessible to get the news at any time of the day. You could be
Absolutely.
sitting in the train, you could be doing anything anywhere, even maybe exercising, and you see some breaking news alert pop up. Um,
Definitely.
yeah, so I think that's a big deal. Go ahead.
Do you think that it's it's just like a matter of time before print media becomes sort of outdated, because that's how it feels like where it's going? So what's your take on that? Do you think it's just going to become outdated and everybody's going to be using social media in the future?
I think that is very likely to happen. Um, I think a lot of the, for example, newspapers seems like an even more archaic and old medium than TV.
Mm,
And there are people who still read the newspaper. Like you can still get a newspaper when you're walking down the subway station, for example, right? They'll even hand it out for free. And I
yeah,
think maybe a lot of people who are still consuming these older mediums of news, maybe there are older people. Uh, like I'm sure, people who are maybe in their 70s and 80s, they would be much more comfortable picking up a newspaper and reading through it.
sure.
I don't see myself doing it, right? And I'm in
Yeah,
my 30s. And so I can't imagine the TikTok generation who is 15, the teenagers now, ever
yeah,
going close to a newspaper.
yeah,
They don't even watch TV, right? Their primary thing is the smartphone first of all, and then maybe the computer. What about your
absolutely.
take on that?
No, I completely agree with that. However, I am curious to sort of know that there has to be disadvantages of having news on the social media platforms. I mean, how do we know as audience that it is legit, or how do we know that it hasn't been, stirred into something bigger than what it actually is? I think social media sort of you blasts the news, and it just sometimes blows out of proportion, which I think. Whereas if you were reading just a newspaper, it will give you just that information, just point straight to the point information.
Mhm.
Where social media, it will have at least one story will have at least about 15 takes on it. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about it. So what do you think? Do you think that this is an advantage or perhaps disadvantage of social media?
I think there are two ways to look at it for sure. Um, I think traditionally, you know, news media originally was supposed to be very unbiased and it was supposed to be giving you the news. And then you kind of make your
Exactly.
own conclusions as to what the news actually means. And I
Absolutely.
think there was a shift in news going from just reporting to very, very like biased information where, for example, in America, you have the two-party system. You have the Democrats and the Republicans, left and right. The news channels on the left will always give a very leftist bias on the news, whereas news channels on the right will give a very, right bias. Um, and I think as the bias has gotten stronger and stronger, you move away from reporting news to actually giving opinions on news, right? So I think that's my first thing. I just want to ask you, is it the same in the UK as well?
So in the UK, we do have two big news channels, one being Sky News and the other one being BBC News. Now, BBC News is very sort of left, and Sky News is right hand. Now, BBC supports liberal, whereas Sky News are more conservatives.
I think it's similar that way to the US as well, where you have some news sources such as Fox News. Fox News tends to be more conservative, and you have CNN and MSNBC. These are usually more left leaning. Um,
Yeah,
and so I think there is a similarity in that sense. And I think this is one of the factors that has led to people slowly, because they are more just listening to opinions. Like anyone can get information about what's going on, but people seem to be more interested in hearing what the reporter feels or what the reporter's own opinion is, right?
yeah,
And I think one very good example of what's happened in the last year actually is a host called Tucker Carlson, who used to be a primetime host on Fox News. He was very, very popular there. That host was let go by the network, and he started his own news, basically channel on Twitter, and all of his viewership has largely moved to follow him on this new platform, right? So when you have these very large news media personalities like Tucker Carlson, they don't
sure.
actually need a news source such as Fox News, who is this, this behemoth of a company. You don't actually need uh, these news sites anymore as a channel for yourself. You can just start your own YouTube channel or uh, Twitter channel now. It's called Twitter Spaces. Anyone can
Yes,
set up their Twitter space and you can get a following there. Um, so I think that's also one shift. Like the digital world allows you a lot more opportunities to start your own thing. And
absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, do you know if similar things have been happening in the UK as well? Like, are there any big news media personalities who maybe used to work with a news channel before, but now they just have their own YouTube channel or something?
Not that I know of. However, there are a lot of citizen journalists.
Mm-hmm.
Even you and I could make up a story. I mean, I don't have a journalism background, but it
Right.
seems that anybody now can make up any story and put it on social media, and somehow it will get views. It could be anything. And I think that's where it sort of becomes a bit dangerous as well, because
Mm-hmm.
potentially anybody could put any story up and people will probably end up believing it, especially the younger generation. Um, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't think a lot of the youngsters do tend to watch Sky News or BBC News. I mean, I'm almost 29. I don't watch it, so I don't think the younger generation would be, interested in that. So I think a lot of it is to do with that people just will start a Facebook video and live story, sorry, and
Mm-hmm.
they will create their own news. Or if there is something happening in the streets, people will just pull out their phone devices and start recording, and that'll become a news as well. I mean, a lot of videos do go viral like that, and I wouldn't have heard it on the news, but you still see it on social media platforms such as Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter. So, huh,
Yeah, that's a very good point that anyone can basically post any type of news story. And as long as it's something that's interesting or attention grabbing, it will
absolutely,
get millions of views, it will go viral. And
absolutely,
people may believe it not knowing that it's not even true
exactly,
necessarily. And I think a good example of this, at least for myself and my own experiences, when I've used TikTok sometimes in the past, and not even as a regular TikTok user, but just to see how the app actually works and what it's about. I've often come across these short TikTok clips, which are supposed to be like they're presenting some type of factual information to you. But if you actually investigate it, it's not true, right? It'll even be it'll be some type of medical fact or something, and it'll sound very interesting, and it'll definitely get your attention. But if you do some digging, you will realize that's actually not true, whatever this fact is.
Don't you think that this is creating a very confused generation because nobody's checking the facts?
Mhm.
Everyone's just doing what they're seeing on their screen.
Yeah.
And I personally think that this is honestly creating a very, very confused generation because nobody seems to know what's happening, but people seem to believe everything they see on social media. Um, so, why do you think that that could be? And why do you think that now social media has risen so much that the youngsters are just not interested in any of the traditional news newspapers, news platforms?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's a phrase I hear a lot, which is called it's the attention economy.
Hmm.
So whatever gets attention is what sells basically and what interests people. And I think stuff like TikTok and Facebook and Reels, all of these things are very short, very flashy
Grabbing. Yeah.
content that really gets your attention, but for a really short amount of time. And
Yeah.
it kind of, the more you consume it, the more you're training your brain to get something really, really quick, and then you're done, right? And I think traditional news sources like reading a newspaper, actually reading, right? It takes more effort and it
Yeah.
takes more attention, and you have to put something into it to get something out of it. Um, Even watching news, right? Someone actually presenting news to you, it's not going to be 30 seconds long. It's going to be most likely at least 5 minutes for you to get
Absolutely.
all the information and all the facts. So I think the digital media as just a source of news, the way that it presents news, it kind of trains people um, to get information very, very quickly and not put in much effort. I think
Now,
that's one issue.
sure. Now we come from myself and you, we come from a generation where we've kind of seen traditional media as well as the social media.
Yeah.
However, the younger generations, as you call them, Gen Zs,
Right.
um, how are they? Because they've not had that shift that we've had, because we've seen both.
Mm-hmm.
However, have only seen one side. And I think that they're completely unaware of how it used to be, whereas we
Yes.
kind of both sides of it. So what do you think this means for the future generation? Do you think that this is just going to become a thing where everybody's on social media constantly looking for news? Because I also think that a lot of false news is put on social media as well, which can sometimes, even lead to bullying.
Mm-hmm.
Someone may, I could post something about you, or you could post something about me that could be completely false. But if it's interesting, people will believe it, and people will see it, and it will grab their attention. So how safe is it that the younger generation are completely relying on the social media platforms to gain their news or gain their information?
I think it's definitely an issue. Twitter, for example, at least implemented this thing called um, like it checks whether a news source is trustworthy.
Mm,
And it will also do some fact checking on different news sources. And I think it will even give you some type of like information or snippet right below the post
mhm.
saying we reviewed this and we don't think this is accurate. I think Facebook does this as well. Um, I think that's one good way of actually countering misinformation or fake news, because as long as you are using this platform, you have some sense of, okay, I don't think this information is accurate because I see this warning, right, that this may not be an accurate news source. Um, but I think again, that's confined to if you're just using Twitter, right? As soon as you go to somewhere else, if you go to TikTok, I don't think TikTok has any type of fact checking, right? Anyone can post anything there. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so I guess I'll throw the question back to you. In your own experience with different digital platforms, have you seen any measures to counter misinformation or fake news? And
Uh,
in your own, like maybe even your friends, have you ever discussed this with them? Like, oh, I don't think this news information from this source is actually accurate.
Definitely. I mean, some of the news that I do come across on TikTok or
Mhm.
Instagram, it just doesn't seem accurate.
Yeah.
However, I can think that, but would the younger generation, would they think the same? Do you think that because, as I've said, as I've mentioned previously, that
Yeah.
we've seen both traditional as well as social media platforms, so I can sort of differentiate in the two. However, if you haven't experienced the traditional news, then how are you supposed to know the difference between the two? But yes, in my case, I have come across a lot of different types of news where I've, thought, oh, this is legit, and then I realized that no, it's actually not accurate. It's not true when you actually research into it. Um, so yes, I have actually come across, and I know a lot of my friends have also, sometimes you just get like, oh, a message like, have you seen this news, or have you
Mhm.
seen, and you're just like, oh my god, and then it turns out that it was just false. I
Yeah.
think we are a lot of us are now falling into the social media trap because
Mhm.
everything seems to be, AI, and it's all like virtual augmented reality. So
Yeah.
sometimes you don't know what to believe and what not to. And that's where I say it's getting quite confusing because one source tells you something and then the other source tells you complete different. So it's really hard to differentiate between the two. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that there is a lot of misinformation, but because at least people like us and our age group, millennials, we
yeah,
have experience with both sources of news. We maybe tend to be more questioning and we don't take everything at face value. Whereas some of these younger generations, Gen X, Gen Z, they only know TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. And if they see something, maybe they just have this assumption that whatever I see on these social media platforms, it must be true, right? Or I can believe it, um, unless someone proves it to me otherwise, right? But they
absolutely.
may not even have the inclination to go, okay, maybe I should look this up and try to see is it actually true or not. Um, so yeah, I think that kind of the difference in experience because of when you were born, and what types of information you've been getting since a young age. I think that makes a big difference for sure. Um,
Cool.
I think another thing I would like to ask is, based on your experience, how do older generations like our parents, how has their experience changed, if it has changed at all? Because they were the ones who in the past were first reading newspapers and then maybe consuming TV for most of their lives, getting news. I think I can say that for my dad for sure. How has your experience been?
To be very honest, I do remember my parents reading the newspaper a lot.
Mhm.
Whereas now, sometimes when they're on the go, it will be like, "Oh, have you seen this on Facebook?" My dad certainly does like his, television news.
Okay.
Um, my mum as well to an extent, but I think it is more social media focus, because it's like, if I can get the same news on social media, well, what's the point of watching it on television? And I think with my parents, they watch a specific channel, so it's not the news of the world. It's more of like a country, or more of like just the place where they're at. So
Mhm.
it's not like a worldwide news, what obviously traditional media can provide. um, but I do think that a lot of people, even the older generation, a lot of us don't, I don't like to use this word, but don't bother fact checking. um, they
Right.
sort of like, just go with the flow. Whatever they see, it's like, okay, yes, I believe it, because I feel like that um, everyone is, always in a hurry, is such a fast paced um, environment, and everybody's just too busy to fact check anything.
Yeah.
One day I can tell you, oh, this happened, and then you'll tell the next person, and it'll just spread until somebody realizes that it's not actually true. um, so I do think that fact checking is essential when it comes to social media platforms, because with traditional newspapers, I can say, okay, yeah, this is legit, because we're aware of newspapers like Sky, or Daily Mail.
Hmm.
We know the newspapers are going to be accurate. However, we don't know if the social media is accurate or not, and I think it's very important to pay attention to this and consider what you're consuming.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Um, if you have this perspective that I think I need to fact check before I just believe everything I see, right? That can definitely help prevent just believing everything you see on the internet for sure. Um, and I think one other thing I'd like to touch on is even these traditional news sources, BBC or Fox or Daily Mail, CNN, whatever it may be, as we were saying before, a lot of these sources have kind of their own agenda and their own bias towards what information they lean. And they may report accurate information, but they may skew it in some way so that you are not really seeing the full picture. And seeing both sides of the information and getting your information from multiple places can help you see, I guess, a bigger perspective. Um, because for sure, each one of these companies um, has their own agenda. Like they want you to see some information, they don't want you to see something else, um, or they want to influence your opinion on something based
Yeah,
on how they will present it. So um, I always hear this a lot that especially because of the US, because of the political situation here, you can never see the full story by just looking at one news source. You have to look at multiple to get a full understanding. Do you think that's the case in the UK as well?
I would say so. However, I don't think many people are to sort of I don't think many people have the time to read multiple sources. They will
Yeah.
they will just have one source, and they will believe that. And sometimes I think with social media platforms, you can get the news stories that the mainstream media news might miss.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can, I guess, the advantage could be that you get to see a lot more on social media, whereas
Yeah.
if you have a newspaper, you've just got the newspaper.
Because the time is limited, it's hard to go to multiple sources. But then the advantage on social media is you can automatically get so much more news, right? Just by following, you could let's say you could follow 5 different news pages on social media, and each one of those will give you kind of a different perspective on news, right?
Yeah. So Byron, I also want to sort of ask you, like, what do you think the future of news consumption will be? Because with virtual reality as well as AI, what do you where do you think we're going with that? What do you think is going to be the ultimate future of news consumption?
Yeah, I think traditional news media, I think, will eventually die out. Um, in the US, an example of this happening is CNN. So CNN used to be this very, very popular news source for a very long time. But recently, its viewership has declined a lot, and it's just lost the amount of power it used to have. And I think one of the reasons for that is definitely the fact that, as we were discussing, it's so much easier to get your news from so many different sources on social media, right? You could follow 5 news channels on Facebook, you could follow some on Instagram, and you could get your entire day's news from all of these sources. And so you don't need to turn to sources like CNN. And I think, like you were saying, it's the convenience of being able to get the news in this way, but it's also the fact that people don't have enough time to sit down and watch CNN every night, maybe, let's say. So I think I see the traditional news sources dying out eventually. And I think, eventually, if someone wants to be a news reporter, or, these journalists who currently go on TV and report the news, I think they could start their own channels. Because even regular people, right? I follow some channels on YouTube which are just regular people talking about the news that they are reading about on the internet, and they're just discussing it and sharing what they think about it. Um, so I think it opens up the door for so many people to just take on reporting the news themselves. How about you? What do you think about it?
I know that you've said that we've previously mentioned that it is a lot more convenient.
Yeah.
However, when do you think we got to this stage where we started to think that social media platforms are a lot more convenient than traditional media? When did this shift start to sort of happen? Because it did happen gradually. It's not something that was, overnight. It
Yeah.
has happened gradually, and I'm just interested to know, why do you think that there's been this massive shift in news
I
channels?
think,
And yeah.
yeah, I think some news sources, news channels, they must have seen, like, people spend a lot of time on Facebook, on Instagram. And why don't we start posting some of our news on Facebook, right? Maybe people will also view it there, and then we can link it back to our websites, right? You can always kind of see a snippet of the news, you can click it, and it'll take you to the actual website where you get the full news story with the video and everything. And I think this was probably the starting point, and slowly, as social media just exploded and
Mm,
everyone has a smartphone, everyone has the ability to sign up for Facebook or Instagram. um, they realized, like, we need to prioritize
yeah.
this medium of news as well for people.
I mean, I remember the time, when I had my first phone. It was a smartphone, certainly.
Right.
uh, one of those flip phones where you dial a number and just check text messages.
Right.
um but if you were to hand that to a Gen Z now, I don't think they would know what to do with it.
Right. Right.
So
All right. So as we conclude our discussion for today, we reflected on how, because of the convenience of social media, it's easy for people to just turn on their smartphone, open up Facebook, and get their news as they are going about their day, whether they are sitting in the bus, or the train, or just maybe even going for a walk or exercising. There's always news bombarding us and hitting us, right? And it doesn't require people to sit down in the evening and turn on the TV and consume news that way. And we were also talking about how there are advantages of digital news sources, but there are also disadvantages where, especially for younger generations, Gen X and Gen Y, Z, they don't often have this inclination to question what news they're getting from social media and to also fact check. And fact checking, I think, in the modern age in 2024 is very, very important. And how about your thoughts, Faryal? What do you think in conclusion?
I would definitely say don't believe everything you see. Um, have multiple sources, look into um, different sources before you make up your mind on something. I do think that social media is a big distraction, even though it's a great thing, and uh, it's something that's revolutionizing. However, when it comes to social media, you have to be, I think, very careful, because honestly, you don't know what one person is consuming and what one person is thinking, and the news could be the news could be completely different to what one is thinking, and I think it can have a big impact on the younger generation if they're not fact checking what they're reading or what they're seeing on social media. So I do think that it is very important to always have multiple sources, no matter what you're reading. I tend to have, if I've seen something, I do like to fact check, but that's again because I am used to the traditional news media as well
Right.
as the social platforms. So yes, I mean, lastly, I would just say that don't believe everything you see on Facebook, TikTok, and Snapchat. Always fact check, and always look into multiple sources.
Absolutely. That's very good advice for everyone to follow. Always fact check, always have multiple sources of news so that you're getting not only the bigger picture, but you're also getting an accurate picture of whatever the topic may be. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this podcast. And we hope to do more podcasts on different topics and share them with you. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave your comments about our video. Thank you.
Thank you.